Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. I'm Cipher, and this is the Devil's Advocate Debate Club. Welcome back. Today I'm going to do a subject that can get you, banned from Twitter just for talking about it, according to some people. A subject that is one of the most controversial I have covered on this controversial channel, which is the subject of rapid onset gender dysphoria. Now, this is based on a scientific paper which was, I believe, rescinded by its authors after a huge amount of social pushback. But this basically seems to be a move to have protected them from the cancel culture of social media more than because they didn't believe in the findings of their study. And I've read it. It's quite interesting. For those of you who aren't aware of the concept, rapid onset gender dysphoria is when people, especially young people, very, very rapidly, normally in their teens, become dysphoric. So they start associating with the opposite gender or stop associating with their gender for the most part. It's complicated, and as any trans person will tell you, every person's experience with it is different, whether they're a more classic trans person or someone suffering from the new rapid onset dysphoria. However, a lot of people will disagree that this is even happening or that there's anything to talk about. They'll say that you're transphobic if you talk about it, because what the study found was that a lot of these people were becoming dysphoric because it was socially popular to do so. So while you might be trans in a low acceptance area where you've been made fun of a lot and feel that it's ridiculous that anyone could ever be over accepted for being trans, or it happens. There are areas where, in the area where I grew up, I was told that I couldn't be a part of the gay straight alliance at my high school because I was straight, and you had to be at least bi. Virtue signaling has been around for a while, and in certain, especially leftist corners, it's really been gaining steam. What this means is that you can, in areas where being LGBTQ is not just accepted but embraced, gain social credit or, gain friends just by calling yourself something different. I've always considered my sexuality to be a little bit more complicated than straight. Growing up in the 90s, I called myself that because, gay kids got made fun of, and as the acceptance movement moved into embracing it, for the most part, I tried to avoid all of that and just kept calling myself straight because it's still mostly how I identify. Now, as a lot of the, that's a conversation for another video I've already done. Rapid onset gender dysphoria, though, it can be very, very harmful because we see a lot of the same attempted suicide rates. It is a lower rate than in the trans community in general, but it's a very similar rate for rapid onset dysphorics. Now, a large number of these girls, a large number of these people were biological females transitioning towards being male or fluid. Fluid means neither male nor female, back and forth, or possibly non-binary. It can be non-binary fluid, which means you see yourself as more than two genders, or binary fluid, which means you see yourself as bouncing back and forth between the two genders that we're born with at sex. Or the two genders that reflect our natural sexes, I should say. So, rapid onset gender dysphoria is dangerous, and it's potentially a social construct that can be avoided simply by treating LGBTQ people normally, rather than treating them as special and above and beyond other members of society. This brings me to pride parades. Sorry, I'm stumbling a bit over the subject. I've got a lot to say on it, and it's hard to come into a particular order to say it, but straight pride parades are a recent thing in response to gay pride parades, and really I'm against all of them. Pride in one's sexuality is kind of ridiculous. I mean, there's two schools of thought. It's something you're born with or something you choose, and either way, it's, just who you're attracted to. And I get it, the pride parades initially were about taking pride in the fact that they could have a parade, that they'd moved forward enough in acceptance that society would let them have a parade without being lynched in the streets. And that's great, but it's been taken far beyond that, where it's now about, for many of these events and many of the people in them, not all, about having pride over other sexualities and about how special they are for being gay. And this has become even more, it happens even more in the trans community, I think probably because they springboarded off of the gay acceptance movement. Because of all these factors, though, young people especially are finding that it's more and more attractive to be trans. Now, the study found that a large number of these were young autistic girls girls going through puberty are a little bit more emotionally manipulatable than boys, simply because their hormones are different than boys' hormones. Because of this, it's a lot easier for them to fall into an obsession. I mean, it's not that boys don't fall in love, but, the obsessive teenage girl in love is a trope for a reason. And because of this, it's a lot easier for them to grab onto a new social trend and run with it farther than they should. This is especially true also of autistic people. So it makes sense to me that if transism is a real physical phenomenon for a lot of people, I've talked in prior videos about people with disgendered brains who may have been born with a brain that was gendered wrong for their body and may truly feel that they're not the sex they are. The not just acceptance but pride movement around these people has made it, socially beneficial to be trans, and I think there's a lot of people who have grabbed onto that and ran with it in order to increase their social standing, and not necessarily consciously or opportunistically. I jokingly talk about myself as gender opportunistic rather than gender fluid because I stand by whichever one is most beneficial at the time, but that's not necessarily true. I just think it's something that most people automatically do, and so I assume it of myself most of the time. But being trans is dangerous. I mean, in that there is an attached suicide rate we don't yet understand. Now, personally, I think this all comes down to more research. I think we need to research the differences between physical dysphorics, so people who have a disgendered brain, and what I would call social dysphorics, or people who have gone through other traumatic experiences. Because another common factor is that a lot of these people have been through some form of trauma before becoming trans, and this is true of rapid onset dysphoria, not so much of classic dysphoria, to differentiate between the two, I suppose. See, as this is something that people are being canceled for even talking about, and that the study has been rescinded, it's hard to find the right terminology for a discussion. This is why I absolutely abhor censorship and think that people's opinions, regardless of whether or not you think they're valid, deserve to be out there and to be discussed. See, without getting into the details, it's someone who themselves identifies as having rapid onset gender dysphoria who initially requested that I do this video, and I'd forgotten about for quite some time. And I think the fact that, as I've talked to a lot of people, there are more and more young trans people who see themselves as rapid onset dysphorics and who think it is ridiculous that the rest of the trans community doesn't recognize them. I hate to use intersectional language here, but stop erasing their experience. Like, to the rest of the LGBTQ community who's saying that people are bigoted or transphobes just for talking about rapid onset dysphoria, you are the problem here, because you are doing to them what you've accused other people of doing to you. You're erasing their experience, and I get it. A lot of people I'd say, well, you're just a transphobe. No one really identifies as a rapid onset dysphoric, and that's because you're on Twitter. And, well, really, most of the people I've talked to who do have, in my opinion, a more rational stance on things are people who've stayed off Twitter and who may have had the same social obsession with LGBTQ that a bunch of the people on Twitter have, but it didn't become quite as totalitarian or toxic as the community that we see there. This gives me hope, because it does seem, in my opinion, like the younger generation is looking for answers. They realize that there are rapid onset dysphorics and that there are differences between them and classical dysphorics. This doesn't make one better than the other or change anything about their experiences. It just means that maybe we should be acknowledging and talking about both, and that finding out the differences between them could tell us something important about both, especially about the suicide rate, because that's really where I want to see research done. And people in the LGBTQ community who I talk to about on Twitter especially seem to think that they know what it is. It's just bullying, despite the fact that there have been studies to, well, kind of disprove that assertion. But people on the left, and even what I would consider to be the far left, who I talk to in real life who don't have Twitter accounts, tend to take a softer view of things. And anyway, I've gone off subject again. Rapid onset trans dysphoria can come about in another way that I've found outside of trauma and youthful socializing. There is, and this is I suppose, adult content warning for the rest of this video, so viewer discretion is advised. However, since at least the early to mid 2000s, prior to 2010, I've been aware of there's no real other way to say it, a pornographic hypnosis industry, which I've been following the growth of off and on for more than a decade now. And it's absolutely fascinating and just a little bit terrifying, but for the most part, by and large, these videos initially were, I guess, forced conversion therapy to turn straight men gay. I think a couple of the early videos might have been responses to the Christian conversion therapy rhetoric that was going around in the 90s, but it's just become a industry. And it wasn't too long, about 5 years in, that the popular group switched from gay to trans. So before this social schism really started in the mainstream, before we started seeing these intersectional battles of trans exclusionary radical feminists and the rest and everything else, we saw a industry grow up online of people who are basically trying to turn straight men gay and then trans. And I mean, if you watch these videos, then you're clearly watching them of your own volition and starting the process yourself. So on the surface, I don't necessarily have anything against them. I'm very liberal-minded in the sense that I believe everyone's freedom and, choices are their own responsibility and all of that jazz. However, I do think that freedoms lead to social consequences at times, and that there is a reason behind not just fiscal conservatism, but social conservatism at times, and that this could be one of them. That part of what we're seeing in the gay pride community becoming more fetishized and more kink in their parades and aspects could be these videos which literally hypnotically normalize some of the most graphic sexual anythings that you could do. And I think that this might be another part of where rapid onset dysphoria has come from. Now, this is just my personal opinion, but this one is actually based off of more than a decade of research into an industry that nobody else seems to be paying attention to. Back in, I believe it was 2009, there was a New York Times or Washington Post. No, it was New York Times. But there was an article in one of the mainstream East Coast newspapers, I'm pretty sure it was the New York Times, about gay hypnosis in porn, and that was all. It was never followed up on. I could never find anything else in the mainstream media on it. I just read the headline and got interested in it, started looking into it myself, and found it was a way bigger industry at the time than I expected, and it's done nothing but grow since. So you can certainly find testimonials online of not just hundreds, thousands of men, just in America and more worldwide, who have become gay or trans, many of whom have gone through the surgery because they've become addicted and fetishized by hypnotic porn. Many of them in their childhood. Now, I know, kids shouldn't be watching porn, but you give them all a smartphone and it's going to happen. And so I don't know what the percentages would be. I would love to see research done. I'm not trying to make any assertions about numbers, but I don't just believe. I know for a fact from the research that I've conducted personally that a certain percentage of people, kids, especially autistic kids, have watched hypnotic porn videos and have become gender dysphoric because of it in a rapid sense. So this would be one example that, based on my experience, I can say with certainty is happening that causes people to experience rapid onset gender dysphoria. And my recent experiences in this year, I've heard of other examples of things that have made people experience rapid onset dysphoria. So, oh shit, almost fell. So stop erasing other people's experiences. Try to be a little bit more understanding, and if this is a preventable social disorder that's happening and is causing suicide, we should probably do some research into it rather than just trying to call people who talk about it bigots. Now for the bit where I get into my personal experience. This video is long, I should cut it off here, but oh god, I'm starting to sound like Tim Pool. Anyway, when I was a kid growing up, a lot of my favorite things were things that were classically associated with girls, and then as I got older and they became more accepted, classically associated with the gay community and then the LGBTQ community. I love musicals. I love rainbows. Well, I actually do enjoy sports. I was just never as huge into them as my dad thought I should be, or other guys. I don't really like working on cars or mechanical things. I can do it, but I'm not very good at it. I mean, I actually enjoy the process of watching and learning about them, but for so many reasons. I mean, over Xbox Live, and people have asked if I'm gay because of my voice. Apparently, I come through that way over a microphone a lot of the time. I've been accused of and asked if I was gay, to the point where, I mean, my mom would at times call me gay and talk to me about all the reasons why she would say that she thought I was or should be, until I was in tears, and then try and write it all off as some sort of joke. Looking back at, I mean, her social justice narrative now, it's very, very clear that she just wanted a gay or trans son. I mean, she offered to pay me $100 to dress up as a girl on Halloween multiple times, something which I eventually did of my own volition. And while so there was definitely a point of time in my life when I thought, maybe I will just go through the transition. Maybe I will just be the girl everyone's accusing me of, just to get them to shut up. And this is something that I haven't really talked about outside of a couple of my ex-girlfriends. So my friends and family are hearing about this at the same time as the rest of you. But I've experienced feelings of dysphoria actually a good portion of my life, and I blame them on the social influences of the people, mostly on the left, pushing me towards being more than a straight white male. And I suppose it eventually worked. I no longer consider myself to be purely straight or cis, necessarily. I, have, for as long as I can remember, enjoyed dressing up in girls' clothing from time to time, the old transvestite. But, it I suppose went further than that, as when I was younger, I got into the mentality of being female at time to times. And, well, I was never diagnosed, and a lot of people might say that I was faking, and it's not something I talk about. I had, when I was younger, I would say multiple personality disorder. Now, the thing is multiple personality disorder is basically always dissociative, and I had what I would consider to be associative personality disorder, where the personalities talk to each other, which is supposedly impossible. Anyway, one of them was, as I hit high school, female. And, this allowed me to identify and talk with females, with the women, the girls in my class, a lot better than a lot of the other guys. I was the one that they would generally take clothes shopping with them and ask for advice on their outfits, because I would sit and think about those kinds of things and about fashion and the things that other guys wouldn't. But I still played video games. I still went out and sparred with swords and sticks, and I was still all around generally a guy. I've since then come to terms with the fact that society pushed me towards something that probably wasn't natural for me, and that I'll live with some of the consequences for the rest of my life. As someone who's grown up truly enjoying variety in all things, I don't mind, actually. This is, the kind of thing. I mean, when I was growing up, there's a period in the 90s when, just because homophobia was popular, I was starting to feel afraid that I was becoming homophobic because I told jokes about gay people. I was never afraid of or hated them. I knew in my heart that that was true, but I said things that people might consider to be homophobic slurs because, well, comedy's subjective, and I think just about everything can be funny at times. Because of that, though, there was a time when I'll just admit it, I watched some gay porn for a while in an attempt to normalize it to myself. People had said that, porn is how you normalize these weird activities, so I went to see if it would work, and maybe it did. I no longer have those twinges. I don't know if I just grew up or if watching gay porn normalized it for me, but it was a conscious decision that I made to try to alter an aspect of my reality, and that's the individualism that I want to support and be behind. But as I get older, just like Heinlein Zark would say, I become more conservative because I see the values of traditions and also some of what I probably lost by leading a very non-traditional life. Now it's made me who I am, and there's a lot of good and bad in that too, but looking back, do I think it was right the way that people pushed me towards alternative lifestyles in the community that I live in? No. Am I disappointed in who I've become because of this? No. But I also had a lot of curiosity, logic, and willpower. I never stopped asking questions. I never stopped looking for reason, for actual logic behind the answers that I got. If something didn't make sense, I keep digging until it does. And if it never makes sense, then I'm probably still looking into it. And while I might not always sound like it in these videos, I definitely have grown up to find that I have a stronger force of will than a lot of people. Both my parents have addictive personalities. I mean, both were clearly alcoholics, and I, drank alcohol like a fish for a couple of years when I turned 21 and cut it off as part of a life plan just to see how